For the first time in over 10 years of doing my Book of the Month review for Thought Leadership, I'm actually interviewing the author, Peter Sage. So I'm going to share that with you in this video, that interview, and it's quite compelling. Just want you to imagine for a second, in the context of the lockdown and confinement people have been going through recently, imagine this. Imagine you have never committed a crime in your life, never been in trouble with the police. You go to a civil court hearing around a contract dispute, which you're very confident is going to go in your favour. And because of the way things played out, you end up serving time. You end up getting an 18-month prison sentence. And because of the quirks of this real life story and the way they categorise prisoners, you don't end up in an open prison. You end up, for some bizarre reason, being put into Pentonville. Pentonville prison in the United Kingdom is one of the most violent and difficult prisons to serve time in. It's got many people in there serving long terms for very serious criminal offences. So you go into this and you spend 22, 23, 24 hours a day plus in your cell every day. And when you are out, you're amongst some of the most hardened criminals and having to deal with that. The way that Peter deals with that and he turns that experience into an incredibly transformational experience, not just for him, and in fact for all the people that he touches in that situation. The book's incredible. The things that he manages to do are just amazing and an absolute inspiration. So if you want to get some insights as to what you could be doing in your current lockdown, and if you know someone else that's struggling, I mean, so many people are challenged in different ways by this lockdown. In terms of most relevant book for right now, this is definitely top of my list. So I hope you enjoy the interview and stay tuned to the end, because Peter's going to share a link with you which will enable you to get the book for free. You will have to pay for the postage, so you can actually get the book for free as well. So that will be shared at the end. Hope you are inspired by the interview as I was. Thank you. Hi Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely fabulous, Alistair. Great to see you, and really excited for a chat.
Great, yeah, I am very inspired to be talking to you, and something I've got to tell you straight up front. I've been reviewing books for many years, thought leadership books, and on my website you'll see I've been doing it for 10 years or so, and I review a book every month. And so I'm not going to say this lightly, but my three favorite books of all time, well, my numbers 1 and 2 have been there for a long time, which is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And my second favorite book was my mentor. It's by my mentor, Dr. John DeMartini. It's called The Values Factor. But my new, in at number 3, is The Inside Track by Peter Sage.
Wow.
So, I mean, and that, I really don't say that lightly. And there are multiple reasons for that. And maybe I'm personally biased in different ways. Obviously, first time I met you was in the early 2000s when you just become a Tony Robbins trainer, and I was helping at one of the events there. And so, like, both of us have been into personal development for a long time, but the book you've written is just the most unusual book, and so authentic and so real. It's about, and it's so relevant to what's going on right now. We're in a situation where a lot of people are in lockdown, where they're unexpectedly being confined. And that's essentially what happened to you in a pretty dramatic way. So could you just tell us what happened and why this ended up being a book?
Yeah, certainly. It's very surreal looking back in a way, but I've been in personal growth and business growth since I was 17, so 3 decades now. And I was arguing a business deal in court with a major multinational. When I lived in Dubai, I was building a big alternative energy business. We didn't manage to make it commercially successful, but in a way to try to, boost the income for the business, I was doing some buying and selling of kit on the side. I think I bought $12.5 million of the kit from HP, and I resold it, paid for it in full, resold it for a small margin. And then several years later, when I'm back living in England, they knock on my door with a worldwide freezing order suing me for 17 million. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? They're like, well, we didn't give you permission to go resell the goods. I'm like, I didn't need permission. I'm not a reseller. It wasn't in the contract. Well, we don't care. We're suing you for the difference between the wholesale price you bought and the retail price in Tesco's. I'm like, what planet are you on? But they had a very ruthless law firm, Princess Diana's divorce lawyers, Mishcon de Rea. And they said, look, we know this isn't going to go to court, but give us a six-figure settlement, like give us $100,000 and we'll make it all go away. I'm like, oh, I get it. You're jealous because I sold it at a very small margin. IT is cutthroat. You basically want half the profit I made on the deal because you're jealous that I made profit on the deal. How much money did you make on the 12.5 M I gave you? Anyway, none of that. I said, there's no way a judge is going to look at that. So I didn't play ball. Now, part of the indigo in me is like, no, screw you. 6 months later, they issue a contempt of court application at me to try to pressure me into a settlement. I didn't give it a lot of credibility because they said I breached the freezing order. And I looked at it. I'm like, I haven't breached the freezing order. And I read through it. It was intelligent. It was well constructed. But I thought completely distortion of context. Let me out. If I spend 10 minutes in front of a judge, he's going to laugh this out. And I learned a lot about how the court system works, as you found out. And I ended up being sentenced to initially 18 months as a civil prisoner for contempt. Now, as a civil prisoner, you do automatic half, so that would have been 9 months. I appealed, they dropped it to 12, served 6. So I did 6 months, majority of which in one of Britain's most violent prisons, as the only non-criminal.
Yeah.
And that's, I've never been arrested, never been accused of a crime, still don't have a criminal record. And as a result, I actually went in. And when it was happening, I'm a great believer, Alistair, as I know you are, that identity plays a huge part in how you see yourself. Yeah. And I thought I can either go in here as a prisoner, as a victim, complaining at courtroom shenanigans and all of that, or I can see this for what it is. What an incredible opportunity for me to go do what I've spent the last year helping people around the world and go apply that in a real situation to people who would never normally get the benefit of that. Yeah. And so I didn't go in as a prisoner. I went in as a secret agent of change. And every 2 weeks, I wrote private letters that was never meant for the public to my senior high-level coaching students, essentially taking them on the journey and not knowing what was going to happen from day to day, but writing what was essentially part journal, part how-to manual with all the tradecraft on how I was making change inside. And part you couldn't make it up, but it was real. Yeah. And after I came out, after 6 months, having lost my business, nearly lost my home, it was complete from scratch. They turned around and they said they'd learned more from those 11 letters than following me around the world for the last few years on stage. And I had to help the public by publishing them. I'm like, well, if that's my hot button. So so we published it. I think it went bestseller in 2 hours, Amazon #1 in 4 hours, outsold 3 suppliers on the first day, sold to 40 countries on the first day. And I'm very humbled and blessed to say an online review. It's essentially changed the lives of virtually everybody that's read it. So very, very humbling. It was never meant to be a book, but documents a journey that anybody can use to handle adversity, which I think is very relevant right now.
Yeah, and of course, with a lot of people in lockdown as we speak, where they've unexpectedly found themselves confined, never has this book been more relevant. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about the little pamphlet you wrote called Mud All Stars, which was the first kind of thing that you, when I read the book, that really hit me that was a really crucial moment, the decision to actually write that and to distribute it. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I went in as a secret agent of change. Now, this is a 200-year-old Victorian bang-up prison, Cat B, with murderers and terrorists and drug dealers and armed robbers and all of that. And I'm in lockdown, or lockup, should I say, for many days, 24 hours. Many days it was 23 hours and 55 minutes because short staffing. You got 5 minutes out. Now, hopefully, you should get 40 minutes out on the wing each day. And that's when I had the opportunity to go to work. And I say go to work, I mean go to work on helping people. And as a result of that, and looking back now, as I say, it was very blessed. But I was limited in my time, and I very quickly started getting groups of prisoners that wanted my help, and I was limited in my availability. So I thought, if I could write something like a short story, because there's a couple of things here. If you do unsolicited coaching, as a coach yourself, you know this, you're going to meet with resistance, because the primary fear, which is the fear that we're not enough, will be triggered. Because if I come in and say, hey, listen, here's how I can help, the presupposition is I'm not. So if I tell you to do something, I explain how to do something better, it's being filtered through the position of where I'm at right now isn't good enough. And a lot of the time people unconsciously resist that, because the cost of awareness is also responsibility.
Yeah.
So there's a technique called third-party enrollment, which means if you're sitting next to a couple of people having a chat and they're having a conversation and they're sharing some good advice, you're listening in thinking, wow, that's really interesting. That's pretty cool. It's not about you, so therefore your guard is down as to the defensive nature. So I wrote this short story, this fictional story about a young guy coming into prison for the first time, deer in the headlights. And he sits next to this wise old con in the waiting room, and they strike up this conversation. And that conversation changes the entire experience of prison for this guy. And I called it Mud or Stars, taken after the old adage, two men sat behind prison bars, one saw mud, the other saw stars. And it's a short story. It's only 4 pages long, but I had to cram in there enough information to transform people's thinking and turn the experience of prison from something traumatic into something far more palatable or even empowering. Yeah. And yes, it went, it's funny because I wrote it by hand, and then I found myself in education one morning, unsupervised. Now, this never happens in Pentonville, right? Yeah. You are supervised 24/7, or you're in your cell. Yeah. And the supply teacher hadn't shown up. There was a secondary teacher. So they locked us in the classroom to go find out what was happening. Now, I'm in front of a computer and a printer and a keyboard, and I've got my handwritten document here. I speed type it out. I do 60, 70 words a minute. And all the other prisoners are rifling through drawers and looking for stuff they can steal and arguing and whatever. And I'm just banging this thing out in the zone. I hit print 50 copies and I stuff them under my jumper. By the time they come out, she comes back and I go back to my cell and I fold the corner. There's 4 pages together, and I sort of fold the corners over to try to keep them in and collate them all. And for the next few days, I infiltrate the prison like a secret mailman, like a mystery mailman. I'm sliding them under cell doors at random. I'm leaving them on desks or pinning them on notice boards on the way to class, and leaving one in the library here and there. It started to create a movement. And within a week, you could actually start to hear other prisoners shouting across the wing to each other, mud or stars, to try to cheer each other up. And that was just one of the initiatives. I mean, I actually ended up winning a national award for that piece of work that was aimed at trying to help people, as well as getting them off drugs and stopping suicides and all that kind of stuff.
The thing I love about the Mud and Stars is it's so simple, and stories are often like that. Because for me, that story is really the bedrock of the whole book, isn't it? It's because it's about empowering yourself simply by changing how you see the world, whether you're seeing mud or stars. Yeah. And I just think that right now, a lot of people are challenged by that very thing in their life. They could ask themselves the same question: am I seeing mud or stars? Whatever their situation. So
100%. One of the biggest messages that came out of that, which is what I'll invite all of the listeners and readers to really get their mind around, is that your circumstances never, ever define you. They simply give you the opportunity to define yourself. There's going to be a lot of winners and a lot of losers that come out of this whole global issue. And it has nothing to do with the external circumstances. It has everything to do with your relationship to the external circumstances that will decide where you go. Yeah. And Tony uses a classic example. If you've ever been in a relationship where, let's say, somebody left you, you've got 2 ways you can communicate to yourself. You can either say, well, I'm no good, so they left me. Yeah. You say, well, thank God they went, so they made room for somebody who's right.
Yeah.
You extrapolate those 2 thought processes 12 months, and you've got 2 very different lives. Same out-of-world circumstance, same person left them, completely different life because of how they related to it. And that's essentially what the book is. It's a how-to manual for building and empowering psychology in the most extreme circumstances.
Yeah, and I think there's a technique called reframing, and I think if anybody really wants to understand the power of reframing, and pretty much every aspect of it's in your book. So for me that was unbelievably powerful. After I when this lockdown happened, I did a video for a lot of my clients, and I called it "Preparing for Rain," and it's based on the ancient story of two farmers who there's not been any rain for months, and they're both praying for rain, but only one of them is going out every day and preparing his field for the rain. So he's sowing his seeds in the right way. He's putting the irrigation channels in. He's putting where they can catch the water and store the water. The other one just goes out and prays every day for rain, but only one of them is preparing. And that's essentially when I did that video. The next day I read your book, and I thought, my goodness, there's quite a few alternative titles for this book. You could have called it "Preparing for Rain." You could have called it "Mud or Stars." You could have called it "The Inside Track." So I'm interested as to how you actually picked the name of the book. What process?
Well, it was really from the first letter. It was, again, from I'd been banged up for 10 days by the time I started writing the first letter, because I had no access to pen or paper.
Right.
And it was in January. It was freezing cold. Again, there's no real heaters in this place, and we go out and have 40 minutes, hopefully, on the social in the wing, most of which you spent on the queue for the telephone for your 4-minute call. And hopefully, if it's not raining, we'll go and do 40 minutes exercise outside, where you basically walk around kind of Midnight Express style. And again, this is a Cat B, so it's the center of the prison. There's barbed wire, razor wire, dogs, on handlers, all of the people. There's netting across the top to stop the drones dropping stuff. I mean, and it's a hotbed of a lot of where the frustrations come out with the fights. And it's a fascinating laboratory of human understanding and behavior. But I remember walking around after a week, and we wouldn't get to walk around if it was raining, because the guards didn't like getting wet. So if it was raining, they wouldn't put us out. So and it's January in England. It's rains pretty much all the time. So I remember walking around the outside, and I've been walking around for 15, 20 minutes. And I thought, I need a pen. There's so much I want to capture to send to my students. They've not heard from me. They didn't know what was happening. And lower the importance, put it out. I walked around. Right on the floor in front of me, there's a pen and paper. Now, that's valuable currency.
Wow.
And it wasn't there the last 4 times I walked around. And 200 prisoners been walking around, not spotting. I mean, that just doesn't happen. So bang, sign from the universe. I grabbed that, put it in my pocket, went back, and I started writing my first letter.
Yeah.
And I called it, just basically for the association to what was happening. I called it The Inside Track, because I was telling it, I was inside, and I was basically telling what the inside track was on what was happening. And that's how, and then it stuck with each letter. And then obviously when the book came out, it just made sense to call it The Inside Track, because that's what all the letters are done. And all the original letters are handwritten. Again, that was 100,000 words of pen and paper.
Yeah.
In the days before keyboards. I mean, wow, I've got so much more respect.
And I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is there you are, you kind of almost don't fit in the prison, almost to the extent that when you had your medical checkup, when you went in there, you say in the book, the doctor even kind of smelt a rat and thought, are you some kind of inside, kind of spy or something? You kind of just, it must have been pretty weird, because you're a guy, and I've seen some of the work you've done. You work at big events, you help to empower people. You're a very spiritual guy. You must have really stuck out like a sore thumb in that prison.
I think, well, it was funny, because the first person that saw me was the guard checking me in to give my clothes, right? And luckily they're not orange in England. Yeah, they were kind of like grey jumpsuit, sort of like tracksuit top and bottoms. And he looks at me and says, "Are you a copper?" I'm like, "No, and please don't give me that label coming in here." He says, "You look too calm to be a prisoner." Like that. I said, "It's all good." And anyway, then I'm sitting in the waiting room, and I do an intervention in the waiting room while I'm waiting to be processed. I was there for about 4 hours. A guy called Jamie, bless him. And then I get called in for the medical, and I'm chatting away with the doctor, and he's a cool guy. And literally, he leans over the table. He says, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Sure." He says, "Are you undercover?" And I start laughing. I'm like, you're the second person that said that. I says, why do you ask? In 20 years of being a prison doctor, I have never seen anybody so happy on their first ever day in prison.
Yeah.
Right? And I said, well, come to think of it, I probably am undercover, because here's what I think I'm here to do. I'm here to help it. This is what I do in my life. And I think I've been sent here for a reason, and I'm excited. I mean, for me, it was a field trip. As I said, the first letter I write, theory doesn't cover the price of admission to the higher levels of consciousness. You want to see somebody, a relationship coach, how good are they? See how they handle a divorce.
Yeah.
You see a health coach, how good are they? See how they handle a stage 4 diagnosis.
Yeah.
Right, for themselves. And that's when you know if it's real or if it's a book that sounds good, doesn't work in theory, or the guy looks good on stage but doesn't back it up.
So you had an opportunity to work at the absolute sharp end of, the challenge of helping people to transform. I mean, you couldn't have got a more difficult situation. And I know that you're a big fan of Nelson Mandela. And I'd be interested to know what you think. What did you learn in that context?
Well, I've had the pleasure of working closely with Mandela's family over the years. We did a lot of my Sage Business Schools in South Africa. And we worked in partnership with the Mandela Legacy Foundation to provide scholarships for people out of the townships, specifically in Soweto or Guguletu in Cape Town. And we've seen massive transformation of those sort of 16, 17-year-old kids with zero hope come through that and transform, either getting over sexual abuse, starting their own businesses. And it's, it was a privilege to be able to work with the family for those. In fact, the first ever Mandela Day, I was at his house on the anniversary of his death. We've been repairing gravestones in Soweto all morning. And so I've got a strong affinity for the message. But I think what we're seeing globally right now, especially with the lockdowns and everything else, there's a lot of political driven decisions. They're not data-driven decisions, and politics is always filtered through the lens of how is this going to affect me, my career, my re-election chances, my position, yada, yada. Am I going to leave myself open to ridicule from the opposition? There's that stuff going on. Politicians are naturally compromised around serving the greater good because it's always a short-term deal. And I go into that a little bit in the book when I'm explaining to my students. Whereas the role of a statesman, and I use that gender neutral, is to do something that they believe serves the long-term greater good over and above their own levels of popularity.
Yes.
And the last great person I saw that had that was Mandela.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came out of 27 years, 18 on Robben Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a time where the country was about to explode into civil war. And it wasn't just blacks versus whites. You got every spectrum, from the Zulus attacking other tribes to it wasn't just race against black against white and apartheid. It was intertribal warfare. It was everyone was power grabbing. Everybody was calibrating predominantly at anger and pride and fear. Yeah, between those three, you'd pretty much covered 95% of the population of the 30 million people in South Africa. And when Mandela came out, most of the people calibrating fear or pride or anger were like, finally, now it's our turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like, wow, let's go. Screw the whites. Yeah, let's go get our own back.
Yeah.
Mandela came out and said no. Yeah, he knew where that path would take them. And he said, no, if I can forgive them, what excuse have you got? Because he knew that he had to unite the country. And that was always his thing. It wasn't about black versus white. It was about equality.
Yeah.
And so he came up with the genius, encompassing identity of the rainbow nation. We are one of many colors.
Yeah.
Celebrate that diversity rather than use it as a way to preclude, segregate, and attack. And so having that, going against what 30 million people wanted to happen because he knew what would serve, was a place of statesmanship. Yeah, and I took that huge. I wasn't there to be popular. I was there to help. I didn't care if people knew my name. I didn't care if none of that was about me. The letters were never meant to be published. Yeah. It was my clients that said this would help a lot of people that made us send it out to the public.
But I was curious that while you were inside your cell for hours and hours and hours at a time, you must have thought about Mandela.
Oh yeah,
those moments.
The contrast frames. And as you mentioned, Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had many copies of Man's Search for Meaning sent in. I was asking for it from my fans, from my team, and I would give them to people who I felt can't sing to the deaf, and you can't wake up the dead. But for those that are ready, I would give them that book, and I would challenge them to read that book and not cry with tears of gratitude for being in Pentonville as opposed to Auschwitz.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's a contrast frame, and if you use contrast frames to your advantage, they're powerful. The problem is most people are using them to their disadvantage. Like now, I'm locked up, in contrast to going out and doing my freedom.
Yeah. Exactly.
Whereas I'll give you an example. Let's say you get called into work on a Monday morning. Yeah, you're in a job, and the boss calls you in, and he gives you a surprise 10% pay rise. You walk out. What kind of mood you in?
Yeah, exactly. Most people are going to be pretty up.
Yeah, happy with that. And so wow, doesn't see that coming. You've got a big smile on your face. You're in a good mood. Then at lunchtime, you're chatting with one of your coworkers that essentially does the same job, and you found out that they got called in and got a 15% pay rise.
Yeah.
What just happened to your positive mood?
Exactly. Yeah.
You had nothing before, but now you only have 10%.
Yeah.
And so most people will not contrasting against empowers them rather than empowers them.
Yeah.
To see Mandela spend 27 years, and I've got to do 6 months? Are you kidding me? To see Viktor Frankl do 3 years in Auschwitz with a 0.3% survival rate, and I've got to do, I get to go to work and do what I do in an environment I'd never normally have the chance to do, being smuggled into prison, by the universe without ever being charged of a crime, and smuggle me out afterwards without having a criminal record. Are you kidding me? That's genius.
Yeah, it is genius. And it's really interesting. You use, you talk about calibration. And I use this a lot in my work, and I've used it working with, martial arts mindset, business negotiations, and just relationships and life generally, that there is a vibration that you have a calibration of. And in fact, a mentor of mine, an elderly lady I know, her husband was really good friends with Napoleon Hill. And apparently when he first wrote that book, before the first print, the publishers had a conversation with Napoleon Hill and said, we love the book, Napoleon, but there's a word in it over 30 times that we don't think people are ready for. And the word was vibration. And he agreed with them, because this was way back in the 40s, 50s, whatever. He agreed with them that people weren't ready for that word at that time. So he removed it. And it's really interesting because that word vibration just comes up a lot, and it's coming up more now in business, in life. And you talk about this calibration scale. Can you share just a little bit about that and how that impacted your journey?
Sure. I mean, a lot of that's taken from the great work of David Hawkins in his seminal book, Power versus Force.
Power versus Force, yeah.
And his creation of a calibrated map of consciousness. And again, it's a nebulous word for a lot of people, so we try to put some practical association to it. Use the word awareness if you wish. And but his work around that should have won him a Nobel Prize. Challenge is that most people that give out Nobel Prizes don't calibrate high enough to recognize the genius that he was. In my opinion. But from a perspective of calibrating levels of consciousness, one thing to understand, emotional maturity and biological maturity are not correlated. There's a lot of emotional teenagers running around in very adult bodies. Levels of intelligence and levels of consciousness are not correlated. There's some very smart, evil people. Hitler was a very intelligent guy. And you calibrate someone like Hitler versus Nelson Mandela, the ability to influence a nation, same level of skill. It's not their skill set that separates them. It's their level of consciousness that separates them. One is completely ego-driven about how can I get what I want at the expense of. And if others become less than because they cross my path, that's part of the game. Versus how can I serve the greater good here at the expense of myself if necessary, or my career, my reputation, my what have you. So being able to count level of consciousness that's independent of your projections as to where you think they should be based upon their age or intelligence, which are not correlated, is a valuable tool to be able to use. And and so it's we all know that there's two worlds. There's a physical world that we perceive through the physical senses, and there's a non-physical world.
Yeah.
Where most people experience every night when they drink. Right? It's still you. Yeah. And that aspect of who you are, independent of your mind and body, is what we essentially associate the word consciousness to.
Yeah.
But on one side, you've got science, which tries to reduce it to a biological byproduct of brain function, which it isn't, never has, never will be, because the brain doesn't produce consciousness any more than a television produces programs.
Yeah.
And then you have, on the other side, the esoteric, sing kumbaya, hold hands and dance around the campfire. And a lot of people that are somewhat left brain can't get their head around that, and it's dismissive. So they go back to science, which they know has rules that they can get their head around. So there's very little middle ground a lot of the time for understanding the role of consciousness and when you can calibrate that, you can look at somebody's, again, you call it vibration. It's a label.
Yeah.
The mind is designed to label so that it can conceptualize, so it can understand. That's why we turn around and say, oh, look, there's a tree. It's not a tree. It's what we call a tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that to reduce this majestic expression of nature that serves so many multifaceted purposes and communicates now non-locally with other trees, as we can prove, to reduce that to a four-letter label so the mind thinks, oh, I've got it, is just silly. So the same thing with vibration. It's a label, it's a word.
Yeah.
Can we conceptualize different levels of frequencies? Well, we're conceptualizing again. So to use it as a model, and this is the thing about models. Models are useful to the extent that you realize they are a model. And you use models to apply to something in your life that will allow you to get practical benefit. And to that extent, they're useful. I mean, we use the flat earth model all the time when designing houses.
Yeah.
Right? So it can have its place, even though we know if you're planning a geodesic flight path, the flat earth models
doesn't work.
Right? So models have their own place, but don't make, to use an NLP term, don't make the map the territory.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And, the final thing I kind of really wanted to talk to you about, a lot of people in lockdown are very challenged with fear or helping other people deal with fear. And obviously the irony of that is that fear actually undermines your immune system, probably more than anything else. So there's a few things in your book about you learned lessons about people wanting to be right, and that's something I've suffered from myself, and I pretty much everyone I've ever had a conversation with at some point can admit that. So I think wanting to be right is causing some angst for some people, whether it's because of the virus or because of information about it. What would your advice be to, I said there's a lot of great advice in the book, but how would you summarize your advice to people right now going through that?
For a start, one has to understand that, fear is your big enemy here. Fear will penetrate social distancing, penetrate masks, and infect an immune system faster than anything that's external to that. So one has to understand, what is your outcome? Are you getting secondary gain from buying into the mainstream narrative, which is promoting fear, because your body's now getting addicted to stress hormones and stress chemicals, which your cellular receptor sites will adapt to and therefore crave more of if they don't get it, right? So there is that aspect, but to understand that you are the star of your own movie. And a lot of people right now are being sucked in as unpaid, unwilling film extras in the Corona movie. Right? And it's big budget, and it's not a good career move as an actor, trust me. Your role is to be the example and the invitation, not the pseudo example and the imposition. You've got no right to impose your model of the world onto somebody else. You can offer advice, guidance, and suggestions and completely let go with what they do about it. If somebody's addicted right now to thinking there is this massive global pandemic that's running around killing everybody over and above what all of the current data is now saying it isn't, then that's their theory. And most people unfortunately forget that the mind's role is to justify your current emotional state. I'll say that again. The role of the mind is to justify your current emotional state. Now that means if you wake up tired, it'll find and search for and present to you the perfect excuse as to why you should press the snooze button. If you're angry, it will search and present to you the ideal excuse for you not to apologize and to blame. Yeah, to rise above the mind's job. Once you know it's the mind's job, you can sort of separate and say, okay, that's just doing what it does. Yeah, that's like blaming a thermometer for hitting a high temperature and blaming it for the heat.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not what it does. So, once you understand that, you can separate a little from it. But if you're trying to validate yourself by having other people agree with what you say, in other words, if you're externally validated, that is based on insecurity, it's based on egocentrism, and it isn't going to serve you or the long-term greater good or the people you're trying to convince, which you won't.
Yeah.
So here's my question. If you know that what you're doing is right, why would you need somebody else to agree with you in order to validate that? Right? Because, as you say, everybody comes at life through different looking glasses. We all have 5 physical senses, for example. That we all have the same 5 physical senses that process all incoming information into the body. But how many of us all like the same food? How many of us all like the same music, or same favorite color, or what have you, or same smells? Why there's so many aftershaves and perfumes. So you can have 2 people, Alistair, standing side by side next to each other, experiencing the exact same event in the outer world.
Yeah.
Breathing the same air in the same proximity at the same time, use the same equipment to process senses and come up with an entirely different conclusion as to what that means. Now, under that circumstance, if you ask the question, who's right, you see the futility in trying to win an argument.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I think a lot of people are being are fearful about the coronavirus and what's going on in the media. But there are equally a lot of people that are fearful of, the information being controlled and various other things. So I think it's an interesting dynamic where you go kind of getting 2 dimensions of fear, and they're both equally disempowering. In terms of, because obviously you went through your own journey. You said that you learned that you're picking your battles, picking the right battles. You said. And particularly in the context of your court case, you learned some lessons there. So people right now that are particularly having their buttons pushed by information about what they should and shouldn't do, or that's impacting their businesses, for example, what would be your advice, your general advice for people? What questions should they be asking themselves to shift their state?
Ask better questions is always the starting point, because questions are the steering wheel of the mind. And your brain, as I said, is trained to answer questions. So asking yourself, why is this situation so screwed up? Why is the government lying? Why is the media trying to induce? Asking those questions is not going to help. Asking, okay, what's great about this situation that I'm not noticing yet? How can I turn this to my advantage? What opportunities does this present to me that I wouldn't normally have, that if I look hard enough, I'd be able to take advantage of? Asking better questions along those lines will give you a completely different, say, the relationship. Why did she leave me? Well, if you're coming from that perspective, your brain will fill in the answer, because you're an idiot, right? Because you're not worth it, because you're not good looking enough, because you're smart, whatever. Your brain will figure out the answer. And if you're in a depressed mood, it'll give you an answer that justifies why you should be upset and depressed. So ask better questions, and that will lead you to more empowering solutions. And let's think about it. Let's do a contrast frame again. I had a good friend of mine, Marius, called me up a few months ago before this whole corona thing. And he said, I need to call you, Pete. I can't sleep at night. I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm totally at my wit's end. I'm like, whoa, what's happened? He says, he's 44 years old, says, got a lump on my chest. I went to the doctor. They took a biopsy. They think it may be cancer. I won't know the results for 3 weeks.
Wow.
Can't sleep. I'm like, okay. Let me ask you a question. I said, what are you most afraid of? He says, well, I think it's dying. I'm like, well, that's kind of bullshit, because at some point that's going to happen. Right? If you're afraid of dying, you're essentially afraid to live. I said, because at some point, I don't care how many anti-aging pills you take, that's going to happen. Everything in the physical world, by definition, its destination is to be non-physical. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I said, what are you really afraid of? Because if it's death, it just means you haven't reconciled what the inevitable is, because most people see death as the opposite of life instead of understanding it's really just the opposite of birth.
Yeah. Yeah. You
So
say that in the book. You say that in the book, don't you? And I think it's a phenomenal point. Thank you.
It's to understand that is a strong indicator of how you will reconcile something that's inevitable. I said, so it's not that. What's really going on? He sat and he thought. He says, well, I think what it is, it's that I'm afraid to leave my two sons fatherless. He's got two beautiful boys, both 9 and 11. I know the family. I've stayed with Maris. He's in Poland. I said, well, here's how I would see this. I said, at some point, do you want to leave them fatherless? He says, what do you mean? I says, well, it's every parent's wish that their children outlive them. And a parent wants to bury their kid. I said, so at some point, that's going to, whether it's tomorrow, in 3 weeks, in 30 years, 100 years, if you take your anti-aging pills, whatever, you want that to happen, right? He says, well, yes. He says, good. So here's what's going to happen then. Let's go 5 years after you die, whenever that may be. Let's say 50 years from now. Can you help your sons 5 years after you've gone? So, well, no. Okay. Are they likely going to have challenges in their own life at some point after you've gone? Because that's the nature of life. It's a growth-centric experience, not a comfort-centric experience. And when people wake up to that, they start their journey of emotional maturity. But I says, do you think at some point after you die, they will have their own challenges? He says, yeah. I says, of course. I said, let's say, for example, let's not choose a health one. Let's say a messy divorce. Is that within the realms of possibility that, the sweetheart that they marry and fall in love with, 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line or 5 years after you've gone, it goes south and they end up in a messy divorce? It's a possibility. Would you prefer that than them have, stage 4 cancer? Yes, of course. It's just because there's a really strong lesson to learn here. I said, at that point, you can't help them physically. So here's what's going to happen. All parents know that kids will not do what you tell them. They'll do what you do. If you're smoking 20 a day and you tell your kids not to smoke, I've got news for you. By the time they're 18, you're sharing cigarettes. Right? Why? Because they have mirror neurons in their brain that override the logic circuits in their frontal cortex. That's just what it is. So if 5 years after you've gone, you can't physically help them and they have an issue, you can see a scenario where those two brothers are chatting. It says, oh, what would dad do now? Hey, do you remember that time where he thought he had cancer? Right? And he was like, you know something, son? Don't worry about it. Listen, we'll deal with it. Yeah, we'll figure it out. If it is, then we'll take the best course of action. But for now, most likely isn't. Hey, let's go play a game. Wow, do you remember how calm he was? Do you remember? I said, you have probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity right now to give your kids an incredible gift of how to show up in the face of mortality, forget a divorce, and be an inspiring example for them that you can leave 5 years after you've gone, right? Yeah. And beyond. I said, because that there is something that is like, wow, I'd grab that with both hands. And he's like, I never saw that before. I said, of course not. I said, too busy focusing on asking the wrong questions. Yeah. And right now, I said, there's a lot of people in lockdown that have a inspiring, potentially once in a lifetime opportunity to show the people around them, those they care about, their friends and employees that are freaking out and running around in fear, show them how to be an example of calm under pressure, how to be an example of what happens when, okay, I may be facing my job loss or my business going down or what have you. Something, we'll get through it. This too will pass. We live in a time in human history where it's impossible to starve to death in a developed nation. So no matter what happens, we'll get through it. Yeah. And you have that opportunity because not only that, I remember my mother once said something profound when I was 12 years old. You know, the age where you know more than your parents and you know that you know more than your parents. And I wanted to watch a film. My friends were watching it. And she says, no, you're up early. You've not done your homework, yada, yada. And I'm like, I can't wait till I'm 18 and you can't tell me what to do. One of those emotionally mature statements from a typical pre-teenager. And she turned around and she said, son, don't ever wish away your childhood because you only get one of them. And that had a big impact on me. I'm like, wow, yeah, I don't have to deal with all this grown-up stuff right now. Or they talk about paying taxes and mortgages, and I don't see adults out there riding their BMX. I get to do what I want from that. We may only get one lockdown.
Yeah.
Don't wish it away, because when we go back after this thing, there's going to be a time where you say, you know something, I wish I could just sit down and read a book. I wish I could just spend more time with my family again, rather than have to be at a meeting at a certain time or dive in the car to drive off or whatever. All of that stuff, which will resume. You only get one lockdown, maybe.
Yeah. I totally agree. And do you know what, Peter? I've got a new nickname for you. It's the King of Reframing. Because I think you do that so beautifully. And I think my advice to anyone listening to this is, if you really want to, so I think the book Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, is a profound book, and it's just a realization of how important the meaning you give anything. But what you do in this book, as someone who's spent most of his life helping people to transform how they think and see the world, you've given in this book a wonderful way for people, no matter how fearful, angry, or depressed they are, to actually, just by reading that book, find some actual practical tools and strategies that you actually used with prisoners, and to actually, and a lot of the stuff you're sharing with me now, just asking that right question, it's profound. And if someone's listening to this and they know someone in a dark place right now, that book is just magic. It's there's a number of people I know personally, not clients of mine, but family members and friends, that I've sent a copy of this book to. So,
thank you.
So that would be my message. And I can just say, I don't know if there's anything final you want to add, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for writing the book. As I say, I go, I'm an off-boat bike rider, and I listen to audiobooks when I ride, and I'm now halfway through the second listening to this audio, and the audiobook is really good. I'd really recommend it, because your emotion comes through, and that really helps, I think. But yeah, get the book and the audio if you can. That's what I would say to people. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or before we...
Well, I'm actually, because I'm all about helping people, I really wanted to help. That was the intention, to publish what was essentially private letters. And and I was, at the time, my major coaching clients, I was charging like 50 grand a year for teaching the kind of stuff that's in that book. It's high level. It works. It's now proven to work in that kind of situation. It's going to be able to work when somebody loses their job, or has a relationship ended, or what have you, face a health challenge. But it's as you know, it's packed full of everything, and I wanted to try to get that in as many hands as possible. So I do have a site I could send people to, where I'm actually giving it away for pretty much the cost of shipping, if you're okay for me to share that. And I do a half price offer on the audio as well there.
It's awesome. Just send me the link, and I'll forward that to everybody.
Perfect. Getpeaksbook.com. I try to make it easy.
Okay.
On there, and you'll see all the reviews. In fact, it's funny because we share a very common friend, a mentor, Dr. John DiMartini. And John sent me an email the other day. He's reviewing it right now, because he wants to give me his views. And
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Very hard. I just had a brilliant testimonial from John Asraf. Another close mutual
friend. John Asraf. I've got some friends of mine that know John very well. So
we're on holiday with John. I mean, he and I have known each other for a long time. He's just sent me a glowing testimonial, New York Times bestseller. And it's very humbling, because, again, I had no idea going in that I would even be writing letters in the way that it unfolded. And again, you couldn't make this up. It's better than fiction. But when you read the stuff at the end of the book, the letters from the prisoners, the letters from the senior officers, even the governors, and the impact it made, I look back and sometimes it's so surreal. I thought, never, ever underestimate the opportunity that you have to turn adversity to your advantage. And that's what, we'll say one of the big messages is. So I'd love to, as many people to get that and share it with people that they think it can help with. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And again, I think it's $20 on Amazon. I think it's $29.99 in Barnes & Noble in the US. I'm giving it away for shipping, and I just want people to help to spread the word.
Well, thank you so much for that, Peter. It's been a wonderful interview for me to do, an absolute privilege. And I feel very blessed. And I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you in the future about the sort of things we've just talked about here. And I'm really hoping that, the more people get this book, because I really think it's really going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much. No, it's been a pleasure to connect, touch base, and let's keep being the example and the invitation. And anyone listening to this, never doubt your ability to inspire others just by being authentic in who you are.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. You take care.
Peter has made a wonderful offer to people who want the book, where they can go to the website featured below here and order the book, only paying for the postage. I think that's fantastic. And I also strongly recommend the audiobook if you care to pay for that, because it was such a wonderful experience listening to it, because you really get the emotion of Peter's voice, and I think you can tell from the video interview that's worth its weight in gold as well. So if you've got a friend who's struggling, get them the book as well, because people who are in any kind of lockdown confinement situation, I can't think of a better book I could possibly recommend other than perhaps Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. But what Peter's book also offers is some phenomenal strategies that he walked his talk and he put these into action. And some of the work that Peter's done with regard to the prisoners and the way he's empowered them, he's still doing work now. He's created a fantastic book called Mud All Stars, which is the basis of other prison booklets that are now being developed and being rolled out to multiple prisons to help many prisoners in the most empowering way imaginable. So go and get the book.